This is a great week. I hope everybody's doing all right out there. We've got Danny Bedrosian from Parliament-Funkadelic on today. It's a big week. I just finished his new book, Make My Funk the P-Funk, and you'll get a review of that. A brief review. I don't want to spoil much, but there's a brief review at the end of this episode. I sat down with him. We talked for over an hour. We talked about everything from his upbringing to writing these books, and it's awesome. I can't wait for you to hear it. But there's some other cool stuff going on in our universe that I want to mention really quick before I give you that interview. Cody Shade Harrell's got a new single out. And Danny and I actually talked about Cody because he, like Danny, is somebody that just went out and made his own dreams come true. And you'll get what I mean there when you listen to this interview. If you're new to the show, welcome. I hope you go back and check out some of the older episodes. I imagine that there's probably some new listeners with this episode here. So welcome to the show. Last week I had Taylor Hollingsworth on. That was a great talk. I really enjoyed talking to him. So check that one out. Once you're done with this one, hit that subscribe button. The other thing I want to mention is friend of the show and previous guest Jonathan Spencer is in the #1 show on Hulu right now. Murdoch, Death in the Family. It's the #1 show on Hulu. His episode comes out today. He plays Jerry. He's another reporter. I can't wait for everybody to see it. He announced the role on this podcast, which I thought was pretty cool. You want to go check that episode out. It was the episode back in season 1 with Slightly Famous Somebodies. It was a really fun one. Pretty crazy room we had going that night. So check out that show on Hulu. I'm excited to check it out myself. It hasn't actually come out yet at the time that I'm recording it, but it'll be out by the time that you're hearing this. So check that episode out. Without any more delay, here's my talk with Daniel Bedrosian from Parliament-Funkadelic. Enjoy. We're on Overeducated and Underemployed. I'm here with Daniel Bedrosian from Parliament-Funkadelic, and also he's a historian and an author and artist and all the things, man. He's a modern Renaissance man, if you will.
Thank you.
And first, we've known each other a little bit for a long time. I was working at a record store when your solo album came out in 2005, and I ran the local section there. So we have known each other for going on 20 years now.
Over 20 years.
Yeah. And we've always never been like close friends or anything like that, but I've always fucked with you, and I'm super excited to talk to you about all this, man.
Oh, likewise.
First question I ask everybody is, I think this is going to be a weird answer for you.
Okay.
What's the first song you remember loving as a kid?
Wow, that's a cool one. That's a good question. Because I started my musical journey as a classically trained pianist. My parents were both concert pianists, and they ran a piano school. So if I'm going to be honest, I would probably say that it was Jesu, Joy of Man's Desiring by J.S. Bach. I don't know, for some reason that appealed to me when I was very young. That's one that I remember struck me with a bullet. There's a few like that. Moonlight Sonata by Beethoven was another one. These were like things I had heard as a kid and never really knew what they were until I was old enough to play them. And then one that my father played, it's 3, I'm going to have 3, but they're just all in my memory from that era. One my father played at a recital, the Piano Toccata by Khachaturian, and it just changed the way I thought about performance. And so those were probably my earliest song memories.
And you were playing piano at
4,
right?
Yeah.
You were probably exposed to these songs by playing them, or maybe hearing somebody play them and then being told to play them.
Yeah, hearing my parents or my sisters or my peers playing them, and hearing them at recitals, like the older kids in the recital, or the adult students or my parents playing them at a recital, and then being like, that's one I'd like to learn. And if I was so young that I couldn't do it, my mother would either give me a reduction until it was time for me to get the real thing. And And yeah, so that was definitely like my memory of that. It was through like concert recitals and stuff and people's lessons, because the piano studio was in the home. I was hearing, and my sisters, we were hearing, I don't know, three pianos at a time all day. You'd hear the
Right.
two students, my parents, two students, and then one of us would be practicing at any given time. So there were three pianos playing at all times. So that creates a kind of mashup too of you're hearing three different pieces of music at almost all times of the day. That changes your perception of sound in a lot of ways too.
So growing up in that kind of an environment, was there like pressure for you to play, or was it just that's just what everybody was doing and that's just the culture and that's
More the latter. It didn't seem like there was pressure. When it's your parents and they're telling you to do it, you just
especially
like,
at 4?
it's like going to school or do your homework, or it's all the stuff you know that you are supposed to do. And because it was the family business, I didn't really know any other alternative. And how about this? Dozens, if not tens of kids, if not more, were coming into or sometimes hundreds maybe at the peak, were coming in and out of my house all week long just to play the piano. To me, it wasn't just like the family thing. It was like almost everybody I knew did it. Especially
Right.
since I'm starting at 4, you're not even in like real public school, primary school or anything yet. You're just, everything around you is piano. And then by the time I went to school, I was like, oh, everybody doesn't play piano. I thought everybody played piano. That's what everybody did. So it wasn't like a pressure thing. And I do remember like a period in 4th grade where I was like rebelling in a way. And I remember like it's the only conversation I had with one of my parents about it was my father saying something like, you don't have to do this if you don't want to, or something. But I remember that feeling like, no, I have to do this. You know what I mean? And again, not from a pressure standpoint, just from I don't want to let them down. And I don't want to let myself down. And I don't want to regret it. And I keep hearing all these adults talk about, I took piano when I was little and then I stopped and I never stopped regretting. And I was like, oh, God, okay. Let me just keep playing. I think this is the right thing to do. So that's what I did.
That's right. And you were also pretty naturally good at it at a young age
Yeah.
too, which makes it that makes it easier
Right. Sure. Yeah.
to stick with it and to want to do it. And you were winning competitions.
Yeah.
Were you competitive about it?
I
that
was.
part of the drive?
Yeah, I was definitely competitive. We had, at a certain point, early 90s, the group lesson theory got really big in like music lesson circles. So they would do 5 of us, girls and boys, and all the same age. So let's say we're all in 2nd grade. And now we're all in a group lesson. We start on our private thing, and then they put us all in the room together, and we start openly competing and things like our flashcards and like note recognition, theory stuff. And it starts being like, we're timing you guys so-and-so, these 3 in one line and these 3 in another line, girls versus boys or some other combination. And each one gets to the front and they have to say they have the same flashcard, and one of us is going to get it faster than the other. We stay at the front. The other one goes to the back. And it was very competitive. And it was even, that competition even spread to recitals where like,
Right.
where you were sitting in the recital was basically set by your ability. So, if you're one of the first 5, you're at the beginning of your elementary sort of level, mostly young kids. But as you get to the back, that's the older and the more experienced. So if I was after my competitor, like my rival, that meant I was doing better than them. If I was before them, I was the underdog trying to get up. So yeah, I was super competitive, especially at those young age. I was very like 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade.
And you were competing against people that were older than much older
Sometimes,
than you.
definitely. Yeah,
So was anybody using the word like prodigy at the time?
Not really, only because I had 2 sisters that had 3 and 6 years on me, respectively.
Yeah.
And my oldest sister was definitely very good. My middle sister was really good. They were starting to diverge into different sort of styles of playing and like what they preferred and things. And so I think because I had them in front of me, it was just like a legacy thing. They weren't going to play favorites. My parents were really good about being unbiased. because the other students would always play this, oh, you're the teacher's kid, the teacher's kid. I don't know, first of all, saying, you think that makes it better?
Right.
My father's finding out that y'all are saying this, and he's giving me harder pieces on purpose. Oh, they think you got it easy? Here, play this. And it'd be like a 16-year-old piece, and I'm like 10, you know what I mean? So it'd be like, oh, man. And I definitely didn't get any kind of special, there was definitely no nepotism.
It was like the opposite.
It was the opposite. Yeah,
yeah.
it sucked in that way. But it was amazing.
I mean, it did well for you,
ability.
right?
Yes. And yes, I did compete against older kids, especially in theory competitions. They would have these music Olympics where it was like you go in a different room. Every room is, one room is ear training, and one room is sight reading. One room is rhythm, and one room is melody, and one room is harmony. And there was a bunch. And you had to, one room was performance, and one room was, there was so many different things. So you had to go in each one of these, and you would get a different score or a different ribbon based on how well you did. And you were competing, it was the gamut of ages. So it was like there were kindergartners in there, and there were high schoolers in there. So yes, you were competing against other ages. Yeah, definitely.
So at what point did you start to listen to music other than classical music?
Yeah. Right away, my parents had a pretty cool knowledge of non-classical music. For instance, we played in the church, so choral music, gospel music, spiritual music, I heard that all the time. Because my father was the choir director at a local church. It was a gig for him. My mother was the organist. And so we had to take part in these choirs every Sunday, rehearsals every Wednesday, and two services every Sunday. So I was like ensconced in that. Maybe not so much the religion part of it, but just the gig, the job.
Right.
And that was
the community
like,
of
yeah,
it.
community, definitely the community. And the tradition. But my father was a very diverse music director, and he incorporated so many different things. And we also did these ecumenical councils where like all the churches in the community would come together. And so I learned everything from like the Catholic masses, the Pentecostal gospel music, the Baptist music, the UCC music, Congregational and Methodist and Lutheran, and I sang in all those choirs. So that was also a training ground. But like for enjoyment, my mother and father had a few things that they really liked that were non-classical. Now, my father first, because 99% of his was classical records. He has an incredible classical vinyl collection, like insane, like the best versions of every opus by the best orchestras, usually out of print, first editions, first prints. He's got thousands, if not tens of thousands of these.
And that's super impressive because so many of those things have gotten like bad releases over the years.
Yeah, oh
too.
yeah, there's
so, like,
tons
being
of
able to find
the
good
right
ones.
Yeah. But in addition to that, he had some Miles Davis records. He introduced me to Ray Charles very early on, and he introduced me to James Brown music very early on, and he took me to my first James Brown concert when I was 8 at the Lowell Auditorium in Lowell, Massachusetts, and that changed my life. That was my first, like, I had seen other concerts. I'd seen the Beach Boys at the beach when I was like 6. So I'd seen them before that, but it didn't move me. But the James Brown show really moved me. Because by that point, I was already listening to jazz. I was already listening to R&B. I liked Motown. And then I heard James Brown, and I was like, oh, wow. My mother, on the other hand, listened to Harry Belafonte, the Beatles. She had first editions of all their albums. And Bob Marley and the Neville Brothers.
Okay, yeah.
So my first sort of introductions to funk were through James Brown, Ray Charles, Neville Brothers. Those were like the funkiest things I was hearing first. But that was at a very early age. And I even took a liking to world music very early on. Being Armenian, we had the Armenian picnics we would go to. We would see the Armenian bands playing. So that was obviously a huge influence on me, like from the very beginning. But I also was really into like West African music. I was really into like Peruvian indigenous music. And I was hearing all this stuff in Boston, just on the street. People, they'd have world music ensembles just playing on the street. And then in Lowell, Massachusetts, which is closer to where I was born, they would have the Lowell Folk Festival every year.
Yeah.
And Lowell and its twin city, Lawrence, where I was born, at one point in America were the most diverse cities in all of America. That was where, like, literally all the immigrants got dropped off and they worked in the textile factories. Because before 1920, all of the clothes in America were made in Lawrence, Massachusetts. Unless you sewed your own, which people did too on the farm. But all the manufactured textiles, sheets, clothing, drapes, were all made in Lawrence, Massachusetts, where I was born. So the immigrants flocked there.
Yeah.
It didn't matter if you were German, African, Syrian, Indonesian, everybody went there. So it really became known as the immigrant city. Now, by the time I was born, that had all changed. It's very much a Spanish-speaking city now. It's 99% Spanish-speaking.
Did you grow up speaking Spanish too? Or?
I learned it in school.
Okay, so it was like part of the standard curriculum?
Yes, it was part of the standard curriculum. I did 3 years of standard Spanish.
Gotcha.
But spoke Armenian in the house as a kid, spoke a lot of words that I thought were Armenian and I found out later were Turkish because my family survived the genocide under the Turks and they lived under Turkish dominance for 500 years. So they all spoke Turkish too. So I was speaking like mixed Turkish and Armenian, Turco-Armenian or whatever in the home. My mother spoke Latin. She spoke French. My mother was a bit of a polyglot. My father was a polyglot. My grandparents, my aunties all spoke 4 or 5 languages because they lived in Lebanon where you had to speak Arabic, French, Armenian, and just know a bunch of different. And
so you're hearing like 3 songs at a time in 3 languages at a time.
Yes. All that stuff. And having a pretty diverse community around me allowed for. I got introduced. One of the first bands I played in was a Puerto Rican folk band. So I was hearing this stuff all over the place. There was all kinds of influences from different music that was changing the way I thought about listening to music. And Chick Corea was a big early influence on me. He was from Chelsea, Mass. So he was from right down the street. And somebody had given me his Return to Forever Fusion albums when I was really young on vinyl.
Yeah.
And that changed my life.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that stuff is insane. And all of this was like the backdrop before my introduction to P-Funk. But I also got introduced to P-Funk at 11.
Right.
And by the time I'm 11, that became my favorite band. That was it. I was like, I'd finally found the thing that encompassed all these other things I really liked. So, yeah, that was how that happened.
Yeah, you're the second guy I've had on here who, like, so I've had Cody Shade Harrell on here before. And what happened with him was he grew up listening to like R.L. Burnside's music.
Yeah.
All that stuff. He just starts going to the Hill Country Picnic up in North Mississippi every year and just hangs out with them. Now he's the bass player for Cedric Burnside.
Wow, check that out.
And tours all over the world with him and stuff like that. You really do, like, when you see something that you love and you set your sights on, anything is fucking possible.
Anything is possible. Exactly. And I told myself from 11, I said, I'm going to be the keyboard player for P-Funk when I grow up. And my parents, who were always supportive of me,
sounds like absurd now.
Yeah, I know, it does. And my parents, who were working musicians, they never said that's stupid. They never said that'll never happen. But my mother, the only thing my mother said was, Danny, aren't they a lot older? And this is crazy. I think about this now. And my mother always talks about it, how as each particular little stride that I had made towards like communication and greater relationship with these guys, including George specifically, each time I remember my mother said, she told friends and family, she said, okay, he got to go to the show. That's good. Before George passes on, because he's not young. And this, keep in mind, this is like 35 years ago.
Right. Yeah.
So, before he retires or passes on, it's good that Danny got to go see them. And then I had the opportunity where I won this contest where you make the bed sheet for George. He used to wear these big bed sheets. And there's a lot of artists in my family, fine artists.
Yeah.
And so I have some, and for a long time, before I discovered P-Funk, my dream job was to be a comic book artist. So I had been drawing my whole life. I designed this thing with all the iconography of P-Funk all over it and lyrics. It was very colorful, and it won the contest. And he's like, you can deliver this to George Clinton in Providence, Rhode Island. He's going to wear it. You get your pictures, and you get to hang out with the band backstage the whole night. I was like, dream
And how
come
old
true.
are you at this point?
16.
16.
So
Okay.
dream come true. So I do that. I meet him. My mother's like, okay, he met him. So that's where it's gonna stop. So then I start getting to know the band a little better. And by the time I get to college, I'm still going to the shows. I'm front row. Now, keep in mind, that very first time I met them, I drop off my demo. I have the wherewithal to drop music off to the guys. And so they knew, oh, he not only was smart enough to give us this, but it actually sounded like something that we could do. Like, he got like that P-Funk, whatever that is, that feel, that ooga booga, it's in him. So,
That stank.
Yeah, that stank. So they liked what they heard, but they first started having me come to the shows, and I would, because I had keyboards, I was a keyboard player, I would provide keyboards and do like technician gigs,
Right.
like supplemental technician gigs for the keyboardists in the band. And keep in mind, at this point, I'm like 19, 20.
And you're in college.
College.
And so, can we back up just
Yeah,
for a
yeah,
year?
sure.
Because a couple of things you said kind of stick with me. Like, your goal was always, from a young age, to do what you ended up doing.
Yeah.
But you still go to college, get a degree in history, Middle Eastern studies.
Yeah.
And what was, like, the motivation? And I'm wondering if having realizations like, oh, these words that I thought were Armenian are actually Turkish because of genocide and oppression and imperialism, whatever you
Yes.
want to, it's beyond genocide, but
Yeah.
that's what it culminates in.
Yeah, the long term.
But the cultural, I think that's one thing that people don't think about a lot. And
Sure.
And I feel like realizations like that
Mhm.
probably were part of why you wanted to learn more about that history.
Yeah. Armenia is in the Middle East. It's a West Asian country, even though a lot of people try to put it in Eastern Europe. It's not in Europe at all. It's in the Middle East. It's in West Asia. A lot of times today, they say the Middle East is an imperialistic term. It's a colonial term. So now they're calling it, they use MENA, which is Middle East, North Africa. I don't see how that's any different. But West Asia, it tends to be like not the common nomenclature.
Weird to call them two separate continents anyway.
I know.
Like
yeah,
a lot of people call it Eurasia. now.
Eurasia. Sure.
So anyway,
But but be that as it may, being Armenian is intrinsically being an indigenous inhabitant of the Middle East, of West Asia. My genetic history goes back in the Middle East 40,000 years. So I'm as indigenous of a Middle Easterner as you can possibly be.
Right.
Now, just a little bit, not to get too much into the history, but
we can get into anything you want to get into.
Okay,
man.
cool. The Armenians lived in the Middle East and West Asia for thousands of years. The Turks arrived in the 1000s AD, so they're latecomers. It's kind of like the Europeans arriving in the New World. It's like the best kind of comparison. And the Armenians are unfortunately the Native Americans in this story. So it's like 1,000 years, it's about 900 years of oppression under the Turks that unfortunately continues to this day with colonialist tendencies and still tearing down remnants of what was left of the Armenians, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Being Armenian, being raised Armenian, being raised by genocide survivors, because my grandfather and my aunties were genocide survivors. So it wasn't some ancient, obviously massacres had occurred for thousands of years, but it wasn't this like ancient thing that like I was told about going down the line. This was taught to me by the people who raised me.
Right. People who lived it.
Yeah, exactly. They have this whole thing about, I never learned about generational trauma till I met my wife, but she started asking me questions, and it was like she kind of discovered, like, Danny, you have like gobs of generational trauma.
Yeah.
And there's all these books written about it with reference to the genocide. And if you are raised by or grew up with one survivor, you have this much generational trauma. I was raised by 3 survivors, so just a massive amount of, and they weren't afraid to tell you what happened. And at age 5, they weren't afraid to scare the shit out of a 5-year-old boy who is otherwise American and knows nothing but semi-comfort, and my parents at least made our life as good as they could, and we didn't know anything about hardship, not that kind of hardship.
Right.
So I felt like it was my duty, because this was the kind of thing that was brushed up under the shelf and put away and denied for so many years. I thought that it was important for me on a cultural level to major in the history of my people and the general peoples of the Middle East. I couldn't just do Armenian studies because the college I went to didn't have the Armenian studies chair. If I could have gone to, say, Harvard or a better school or a school in Boston or a school in like Detroit or LA, I could have done Armenian studies, but it was just too expensive. I ended up getting admitted into the University of New Hampshire. My family lived in New Hampshire by that point, so it was a in-state financial situation. Out of state was extremely expensive. The difference between the other school I'd gotten into.
It's like triple tuition.
It was exactly. It was at the time, and keep in mind, this is 99. It was like $29,000 a semester. Or if you were in state, it was like $9,500 a semester. Right. So $9,500 is way better than $29,000. So that's what I did. I did the in-state option. I paid my own way. And to me, first of all, when I was speaking to the guidance counselors in high school, and then when I was speaking to the advisory people in college, they had all had a unanimous answer based on my training. They were like, music major is the obvious choice, but why don't you tell us a little about what you've done so far? And when I told them, they were like, the BA in music will be all review. Are you trying to get the BA or are you getting the master's or the doctor? I'm like, I can't afford a master's or a doctorate. Not right now, at least. I said, I'm trying to get the BA. They're like, you might want to choose something else, Mr. Bedrosian, because you got this 18 years of classical training. A lot of these guys have just began their ear training or their performance, or they've been doing performance for 4 years.
Like you could teach all these classes.
Exactly, that's what they were saying. So it was like, this is stuff you've not only learned, you learned it a long time ago. Unless you really want to go back and review, or if you want to do some peer tutoring on top of it, this might not be the major for you. So I decided history because I always had a keen love of Middle Eastern history. I like the idea of writing about history. And so I did the colloquium, which is like, not all history majors do it, but it's the kind of thing you do if you want to become like a degree-holding historian or the historian that writes about history. It's really boring. Like,
I know. I have a master's in the history of science.
Oh,
so, yeah,
I know, man. Okay,
yeah,
so writing history colloquial is very boring, but I'm glad I took it now. It was probably my least favorite course in college, but I'm glad I took it now because it taught me so much about what I just wrote, for instance, because it teaches you how to write monographs, you know, history books, legitimate in the Chicago style with footnotes and endnotes and all that.
And different historical approaches too.
Yes. Oh, yes. The idea of either accepting or denying historiography based on source material, based on legitimation, all that kind of stuff. Like, it made sense to me then, but I didn't really care about it. It took 25 years for me to be like, oh, I've got this training that they drilled into me that I've never forgotten. I might as well utilize it in this kind of way. And I will say this, as strange as it sounds, getting the history major, getting the Middle Eastern Studies degree at UNH provided me with a wealth of wisdom in my touring life. Because not only was I aware of cultural norms, and not even just in the Middle East, anywhere in the world, just because of my historical knowledge, because it was something I gravitated towards as a youth.
Yeah.
Just knowledge of historical cultural norms in different countries has allowed us as a band a little bit of degree of comfort and fluidity in navigating certain kinds of travel and certain kinds of hospitality situations and certain kinds of transportation situations and little things. And even little things that you'd be like, oh, okay. You know.
And that makes me think about things like, especially, it probably wasn't as much of an issue once you were joining them. And in the meantime, you're getting your degree, your history degree, and you're also traveling down here.
Yeah.
Pretty frequently.
Yeah.
Work with George and to you were doing recording with him.
That was the beginning of my studio career. Yeah, it was my studio career with George. Luckily, I had been, besides having gigged since I was a preteen, I had started working in major professional studios back when professional studios existed. Major professional studios as a producer from age 17. So like I had already done, by the time I'd met George, I was already starting to work in these studios. And
now, were you doing session work?
Yes, but I was also producing full-length albums, you know, because I had from, I guess you could backtrack and say from 98 to '03, I had what eventually became an 18-piece funk band called Sweet Mother Child up in
Right.
Boston. And we recorded 6 full-length professional studio albums. It's the only music of mine which has not been reprinted or digitized. So it's an interesting side note. And it was a great band. In fact, my wife discovered this music like a year ago. And she's like, why haven't you ever played this for me? I'm like, the band you're in when you're in high school and college, you're not necessarily like wistful about the quality necessarily. But I will say, comparably to all the other bands we were playing with, we were very high quality. And we could stand our own against adults like any given day. But we were definitely kids. And so I look back at it the same way I think that George looks back at his like very earliest records by the Parliament. It's like, oh, we couldn't sing, we couldn't, because you're just thinking about you as a kid. But whenever I go back and revisit those records, it's very rare. But when I do, it's like, oh yeah, we were doing something. So it was a great training ground for working with George. I had 6 albums under my belt, and then I produced 3 others for other bands. So I was like becoming a producer of other groups. Didn't matter if they were punk rock, hip hop, or whatever. And I was starting to really do this production thing. So it allowed me the wherewithal to have some kind of lucid abilities in the studio with George and with the guys in P-Funk when I would come down to what was at the time the studio in Monticello, which is very close to here. I only flew into Tallahassee. We immediately left Tallahassee and would go to Monticello. So Tallahassee was just the place where the airport was.
Right.
First.
Yeah.
And then we were going to this country town in the middle of nowhere, and I was like, what are we doing? And they lived down a dirt road, way in the woods, way off a highway. Because you have to go to like the most remote part of the most remote town in North Florida to find this studio. And yeah, I would work there like on...
Start hearing banjos.
Yeah, exactly. Which for me was big culture shock coming from the North. But
Yeah.
I definitely cut my teeth on a lot of the work with George, like that studio stuff in those early days. And it was definitely a huge learning experience because it was preparing me for my eventual road job. I had done some road work, but the studio thing bracketed between my early road work, teching when I was still in college, to when I got hired on full-time on the payroll. Yeah.
And but you're dedicated to finishing your degree.
George even said, finish school.
Yeah.
Finish school. I would come to the shows, front row, drop off my newest album, my newest music. I'd go backstage with George. Me and George would be singing the rest of the night till they closed the dressing room down. We got to go. We got to get out of here. He'd pull me on the bus. We'd go singing on the bus. Because I knew all the really old songs by like the Parliaments, and he was blown away that this 17, 18-year-old kid knew these songs. Like, how do you know this stuff? He's like, my band doesn't even know this stuff. and so that blew his mind. And I was Boston Danny for years. And then when they invited me down to Monticello, they were like, oh, he can play too. He's a player. And I was doing everything from programming to piano to live drums, all kinds of stuff. And singing and writing. And yeah, they definitely took a liking to me from a very early point, but I finished my degree first because I was paying my own way. And George told me, he said, finish school. So I thought that was cool.
Do you think he saw what you could become in terms of somebody that could help tell his story, protect his legacy, show this this stuff to the world in a way?
I think initially it was just, here's this kid who knows this music really well. I can't believe somebody so young knows this really old music. And I don't think it even had reached like a musicological level yet at that point. Because then they hired me as a technician. Mm-hmm. But my very first gig, I had to play the whole show. So the technician thing didn't last super long. There was a period where I was gigging and teching the whole show. So it was like being a basketball player. It was it was insane. But I think early on, it was really a lot like George saw my knowledge, but the band saw my talent. So it was the guys in the band, Blackbird McKnight, Billy Bass Nelson, Bernie Worrell, Gary Scheider, Cordell Mawson. These guys were like, yo, this guy can really play. This kid can play. And they would have me play with them at sound checks. And then those playing at sound checks turned into me playing in the show. And then first it would be, first show aside when I had to play the whole show. Aside from that, it would be like, Danny's going to play on one song. Okay, he was going to play on 2 songs now. But then by June of '04, which means by that point I'd been in the band 9 months. So by 9 months, I'm doing the whole show regularly, like every night. And so that was like a growth. That was like a growing into that situation.
Right. The music program at the University of New Hampshire wasn't going to teach you anything, but
No.
the College of P-Funk had a
Yes.
lot to show you.
Oh my God. I learned almost as much there as I did in my classical training. Just so much about performance and feel and paying attention and how to play. Like, I always knew how to play an ensemble, but like the real kind of minutia of playing an ensemble and following a band leader and following George, which is a case study all in itself.
Yeah, yeah.
And people like Questlove have said in interviews, like, this is like the hardest band to be in. And I did an interview last night with my buddy Mr. Christopher on Funkatopia. It's like a Prince-centric funk show.
I've seen a few episodes.
Okay,
here and
cool.
there, yeah.
And Michael Bland is his current co-host. And Michael Bland was Prince's drummer in the late 80s and early 90s, New Power generation. And Michael
Like
Bland...
right after Sheila E., right?
Yeah. And Michael Bland had even says, he told a story about how he was asked to fill in one night and how everybody, he was like, man, even the audience, like people who don't even play music, they know all the turnarounds and all the changes. It was it was just too much for me. It was like a cult. Like, he's like, everybody, Gary and George are turning to me and they're hitting every accent. I'm like, oh God, there's just so many moments, so many events. And it takes a musician to see what I later pointed out in that interview, which is that I think the layperson sees the sheen on the front of like party, good time, chaos. But you go right behind that to the band, and it is like everyone is in full-on concentration mode. And if one of them lets up, the rest of them can feel it. Like, it's like all these organisms coming together to become one organism. And it's strict, and it's more strict than people think. Like, it's not this just fun, he lets you do whatever you want. No, like, being able to stay in his band for this many years was not because he just liked me as a person or because I like this band and I don't want to quit, or because I was able to not get fired. Right. That's literally what it is. And a lot of people just can't hang, even great musicians, because it's a very hard job. You have to unlearn a lot of stuff you learned. You have to put into practice theories that you maybe didn't even know existed until contemporaneous moments. And you have to really make those theories work every single time. Like, it has to be perfect every single time, which goes back to my classical training and helps, obviously. And Bernie Worrell, who was my mentor, he was classically trained. And so, like, to have the classical training in P-Funk, to be the keyboard player, it's a must in a way. But I also tried to take it upon myself to learn the way every subsequent keyboard player played this music, because there's no kind of end in the variation to how this music has been played. And if you can figure out how everybody did it, then you can put your stamp on it. And then you can fully say, I understand the canon in like a much more like comprehensive way. But it's not an easy band to stay in. Like,
what are some of the things you remember struggling with, like directly, especially early on?
Yeah, so like in the early days, like George would do this thing where he'd say, turn down and play hard. That's hard to do, especially like when you're like looking at situations where the sound man doesn't want you to turn down. The sound man wants you to actually turn up all the way so he doesn't like get surprised later on. So now you're turning down and playing hard, and it's a different velocity. In a way, it stuck me in this one thing where they started upgrading my speakers over time as I became a more important member of the thing, and they started upgrading my rig. Then I had to learn how to get used to hearing myself so loud. Oh my God, I'm so loud. Am I like bothering everybody? And everybody else is hearing it like, da, da, da. They're not hearing like, Scaldo! Like, but I'm hearing it like I had to get used to that. And I was like, oh no, what is this? some other things too were like George would do this thing where we would be in a groove and it's just one line, and he would have us play that one line sometimes for a half hour. And there's something with repetition. It's no different than if you were forced to recite a single sentence, a short sentence, like the bottle's on the table. And he's saying the bottle's on the table 800 times. Eventually, the bottle's on the table to you is like, it doesn't
Right.
mean anything anymore.
Right.
So you have to find a way for this seemingly simple groove, this line that might only be 5 notes, to maintain its meaning, at best evolve into a new meaning equally as meaningful, if not more, in this half hour that you're forced to very tight. And if you, like, I know it's one line, it's only one thing, but the best, most virtuosic players out there, they can't do it because they'll play it twice and it'll be different.
Right.
Let alone 1,000 times. You need it to be exactly the same those 1,000 times. And if anything, you need to be deeper in the pocket by the time you're done than before. Not speeding up, not getting it wrong, not hitting it wrong once, not hitting it wrong twice or 100 times. You have to get it right every single time. And you have to really be deep in the pocket every single time. And it takes a massive amount of concentration. It doesn't matter if you are naturally good at it or not. I was naturally gifted in understanding the pocket, thankfully. And a lot of it came from my classical training and being able to study with Bernie for so long. But a lot of it came naturally. That being said, you still have to put every bit of concentration the moment you think about something else or the moment your mind veers away from the task at hand. You're screwed.
To be entirely present.
Yes,
Yeah.
those little weird things. Anybody else, like your average to your best players, they're going to play it so sloppy 2 times and not ever think about it any other. Oh, we play this line now. And it's like both times they play it, it's not the same.
It's almost like a meditation.
Yes. And it's supposed to compound the meaning as time goes on. It can't lose meaning. So it's like there's a lot. Like you could write a whole book just about this one little concept I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And it's just one of the many theories espoused by the Parliament-Funkadelic, especially the guys who were still with us at that time, who've largely passed on. Not all, but a lot of them. And they were like real proponents of these theories. And not only is this stuff impactful and important to playing in P-Funk, a lot of these theories are subjectively singular to P-Funk. So like you could play in another funk band, like the Bar-Kays or the Ohio Players, and they don't even utilize these theories. They're just playing through, and they're great. But they're not even doing, it's what you're going to call digging in, like digging your feet into the ground and not moving. That's a thing that P-Funk perfected. And you can hear the guys from Kool and the Gang and Earth, Wind, and Fire talk about it. They'll talk about it in interviews like those guys were on the one and stayed on the one forever. I remember Earth, Wind, and Fire we played with them in not too long ago in Europe. And Philip Bailey and those guys came out and they were talking to all of us in front of George, and they were like, you guys should have seen George back in the day. They used to, Funkadelic, they would come out and they'd do this one groove, and he said they'd do that the whole night. I was like, oh, God. And that's it. They do all their songs over that groove and they'd hold it so hard the whole night that the whole crowd, including us, would be in a trance. And when it was time for us to go on, because they were always like the perennial openers, but they were the openers you almost didn't want to open for you because everything they did was either so fantastic or so extravagantly different than what anybody had heard that it would change the course of what the show was supposed to be.
It's like the groove, it's almost like getting into quicksand.
Yes, yeah.
You gotta just get deeper and deeper into it, not move a fucking inch of anything. Just let it suck you down.
And amaze people with how deep it can actually go. Because people always think, okay, it's not going to get any funkier than where they're at right now. And then the next couple bars, all of a sudden, and all you can do is just be like, whoo! It's just so stinky. But knowing how to do that, like that takes a massive amount of control.
Yeah.
A massive amount of control.
Yeah.
Especially if you're a technically gifted dude who wants to play everything under the sun. And when you're trained in classical and jazz and you're playing fusion and you're doing all this stuff, sometimes that stuff is, I don't know how to put it, not unorthodox, but just like unheeded or missed by your average virtuoso.
Yeah.
Like they missed that lesson somewhere. And I consider myself as technical as the next guy. I can be virtuosic. I can do all the crazy things that people expect from a player at their highest caliber or whatever. But there's another level of that, and that's groove and pocket. And for as many people as I know that can do like a diatonic run in 200 BPM or whatever, for every 10 guys I know who can do that, there's half a guy that can hold a groove.
Yeah.
Half a guy who can hold it like correctly and do what is expected of him. It's a lost art. These people who can do it are dying off like the samurai. And I have a couple of peers who are in my age group where we're like early to mid 40s that have learned this stuff from the masters. There's maybe 3 or 4 of us, if that. Everybody else is old, getting older, or gone. So it's one of these things that's been lost to time. And I guess you could teach it at a university, but it still hasn't been indoctrinated or included in the sort of intrinsic learnings and teachings at university level for music students. Yeah.
What I think is interesting, maybe just something I didn't think about, I guess, is like not only have you become the historian of P-Funk in terms of telling the story, documenting what happened, but also preserving the ways of playing and the music in a very fundamental way. It makes me... I had Vaylor Trucks on earlier this year.
Nice.
Butch's son.
Yeah.
And he plays with Melody in the brother and sister tribute band.
Cool.
And their goal is to play it as authentically as they possibly can.
Very
and
cool.
to like keep their parents' music alive.
Awesome.
And I feel like that's your goal.
Yeah. Yeah, very much. When we do, whether it's work with P-Funk directly, doing the corporate act, and rehearsing new old songs for the set that have never been included before, and like really bringing back that sort of canonical flavor, or even doing a special curated set full of music from a specific period. Like with the book the new book, it's 1975, so we've been doing these curated sets from 75, using some of the instruments from that period too. So it's not only just the technique and the technical, but also the technological as well. So that's an important aspect of it.
Now's a good time to dive into this book.
Sure.
Because you start to keep the story going you start not only playing with P-Funk full time and touring around the world with them, but you start also preserving a lot of the things that you're finding. Can you tell me just a little bit about how, is it wrong to say that you've developed an archive?
Yes, I definitely have.
Okay.
And like George has made me like the band musicologist and the band archivist. There are 100 ways I could tell this, but like the shortest, kind of most concise way is that I've been collecting materials, discographical materials, musicological materials.
Probably since you were a kid as a fan, right?
Yes, since like 7th grade. Yeah. And I still have stacks of papers on this stuff. Notebooks that were supposed to be like my math notebook. And there'd be like a page of notes, and the rest of the book is all P-Funk stuff. And never did I think this stuff would all be published. Being an author was not my end goal. It was not even a part of the goal. I didn't even know that I was necessarily going to become a writer, even when I became a history major. And everybody said, oh, you're a history major, so you're going to be a teacher or a writer? Because those are the only, or an expert, where they pull you in. But the expert jobs, it's like being a musician. You got to find gigs left and right. And it's not easy, and it doesn't pay well. I could be the head of a chair of a history studies department at a good school and make 20 G's less than I make now. You know what I mean? So and have way more work. Like it's a ton of work. There's a certain aspect to that where I was not aware that was how it was going to go. But by COVID, it became, this is going to be one of my goals since I don't have a job anymore. None of us are working anymore. I'm going to up the ante on this aspect of my life, this aspect of my life, this aspect of my life. And the 3 big ones were my health. So I began exercising and running, my classical because it was always the most important part of my training. And I just crazy 6 to 9 hours of classical every day, and then writing the first book, the authorized P-Funk song reference, actually putting pen to paper, if you will, and collecting all these source materials, new interviews, et cetera, and beginning the arduous process of, again, 5 to 9 hours a day of writing and interviewing.
Yeah.
So my day was very regimented, extremely long, and full of all the things I felt like, okay, now's the time to do this. I actually have the chance and the time. So that's where it was really a desperation, not desperation. You're in these moments, none of us are working. There's a worldwide pandemic. Okay, now is the time. I'm not going to be bothered. Nobody's coming to the door and nobody's calling. We got a gig for you. So now is the time to start writing this stuff. And so that's how it happened. I was already the band musicologist before that.
Mm-hmm.
But then after that, they started adding archivist and having me do different things with the tapes, the reels and all this stuff, like archiving what all the reels are that George has and getting a full like textual document of all his reels. That's another thing I did, that a non-published job that I did as archivist. And then eventually, with the success of the first book, being able to utilize my history degree at like its utmost and create this second book, this monograph, Make My Funk the P-Funk, which is all about the 50th anniversary of 1975. It's all about the 3 albums that came out that year and how that year is essentially the paradigm shift, the movement, the sort of watershed movement that transformed Parliament-Funkadelic into P-Funk, as it were, and stood as the kind of the middle point between their status as like the darlings of the underground Chitlin circuit, still riding in station wagons, to having a spaceship and a platinum album and songs in the top 5 and like pop success for the first time. So it's a year that a lot happens. It's the beginning of their superstardom. It's not the beginning of their stardom, but it's the beginning of their like massive superstardom. And it's a year when you can really track almost 2 different entities in one. They were this way at the beginning of the year. It became this by the end, and it never changed. There was never any turning back, in a way.
Yeah.
To that old
yeah.
one. Yeah.
So I got a few questions. I guess so the first book is like a kind of just a tome of everything.
Yeah.
Maybe it's almost like a document.
Yeah,
if
yeah.
you will.
Reference.
A reference
Encyclopedic.
book. Yeah. And it's an encyclopedia of P-Funk is what it is, essentially. And your approach to this book is very different. It's
different.
Much more, and obviously it comes out today or tomorrow, so I haven't read it yet.
Yep.
But from what I understand and from hearing other talks that you've given, it's much more of a story.
Yes.
Right? You're telling much more of a story.
Yep.
And something that you said earlier about your history degree and how that's helped you guys on tour, especially internationally.
Yeah.
How much about did you see it change in terms of them having to use things like the Green Book at the beginning of 1975? The end of it being a little bit more easy for them to get around the country.
Yeah.
Can we talk about that?
Yes. To your first point, it is very much more of a narrative. I've actually met a few people recently. A good friend of mine, his wife, told me she read the authorized P-Funk song reference cover to cover. I said, I've never even done that. I wrote the book.
Yeah.
I was like, really? And he said that she didn't really know much about P-Funk before, so this was like her introduction. I'm like, well, that's a hell of an introduction because it's the nerdiest. It's just straight information, cold, hard facts. And this is story-based. It's definitely narrative. That book is chronological too, but this chronology is the kind that you can pick up before bed, read a few pages or maybe even a chapter if you're that type of reader, put it down and get ready for the next day at the same time. Those kind of before you go to bed reads. This is that good kind of before you go to bed type of read.
Yeah.
And to the second point, you were saying how the band changed, and a lot of this, there's the first chapter actually, after all the introduction material, after all the back matter, there's a chapter on the actual history of 1975. So it
Cool.
deals with like political history, military history, economic history, demographic history, technological history, and touches on important events that shaped the world at large, including George and Parliament-Funkadelic, and shaped not just their motivations, not just their insights, and not just their lyrical and musical framework, but shaped their ability to conduct their business on a day-to-day level. Like you said, things like the Green Book, for instance. There were strides taken towards the accession into higher echelons for the African American community in 75 that helped allow for an album like, say, Chocolate City to come out in April of that year. And there are events that transpire alongside it in history that help to allow for something that would be considered subversive 2 years before to be accepted and even chart 2 years later. And so I talk about a lot of that in the book there, but I also talk about how despite the accession for the sort of movement forward, there were still massive demographic, economic blocks on the African American community that are stopping them from being able to achieve how they could at their highest level if they were allowed to. And so it talks about how strides had been made, but there would need to be further strides made for such ideals to actually take shape in reality. But for them to take shape in art was why the history allowed certain things to happen. And it talks about also at the beginning, in the first however many months of that year, history is very much shaping what George and P-Funk did. By the end of the year, George and P-Funk are helping to shape what happens in history. It doesn't necessarily flip,
Right.
but there is a dichotomy that finds itself on the other side of that through the success of George and his band.
That's exactly what I was starting to think about was their music changed the world as much as it was in response to the world.
Yes, very much so.
So how, as someone who like works closely with a lot of the characters in this book on a day-to-day basis, I think so history as like a field, it's changed tremendously in the last 50 years. Too.
Yeah.
So in 1975, like military history would have been one of the main ways that people just talked about history, period.
Sure.
And now, even to talk about a band, it's the historian's job to put it all in a context of what's going on in military, technology, culture. But also, how did you put it in the context of, I know these people?
Right. So one thing that definitely helps, and I've said this before, the first book probably, and I'm not saying this to toot my own horn, I'm just saying this to show like that these things happen. The perfect environment has to be made for such things to reach completion and conclusion. People always say, oh, Danny, it's so you always finish your project. That's such a, because those of us in the arts, there's always, I want to do that, but I never will type of thing. And it was the perfect environment, just the right nature had to be in place for me, for a person, for a Danny Bedrosian to write an authorized P-Funk song reference, or even make my funk the P-Funk for that matter, is the perfect duality of this is my favorite band of all time. I've been in this band for almost 25 years. And you put those two things together, and that's how I have a musicologist whose favorite band is P-Funk couldn't have written the first book. A band member who didn't necessarily fall in love with P-Funk organically couldn't probably write this book. I had to have the right combination of know-how, experience, expertise, talent, and knowledge and relationships. Much like the first book, this one has a number of brand new primary source interviews. So in addition to knowing how to place these guys in the context of the narrative, they have placed themselves in the context of the narrative through their own words. Whereas I used the 55 different interview subjects in the first book, their words were used to contribute information and not direct quotes. The words in this book are used as direct quotes. So you're getting from their own words, from George Clinton, Fred Wesley, all these guys, exactly how it went down in their words. So you are transporting your colleagues, your peers, back in time to where they were when these things happened, and they're transporting themselves through their own words and actions. So
Much more of an oral history kind
in a
of
way,
approach.
yes,
Yeah.
it has. So it's a mixture of that narration and the quotes from the actual primary source interviews interspersed. Whenever something needs to be exemplified without a cited source, use the primary source interviews, and those really drive home the most important points in a lot of ways.
What are some of the most surprising things that you found when putting together the P-Funk archive? What are some of the things that like really stood out to you?
One of the things that stood out to me the most is that the general knowledge of personnel, which goes back to my first book, but also affects this book. The general knowledge of personnel is largely erroneous, and so that there's not a concise consensus on who did what, which was, again, the impetus for me writing the first book. But there's 3 very major chapters in this book that deal with exactly the same subject matter, and it's the chapters on the 3 albums in question. So each album
Right.
gets its own dedicated chapter, which are, of course, all about legitimate personnel, important documentation of personnel, and important sort of back matter of those albums. And so for those to be legitimized, you have to take a number of really important steps as an historian. And yeah, that part of the process is of uber importance. And I definitely link the sort of correctness of or the aptitude for getting this stuff right to a complete sort of what do you call it, like adoration for authenticity, a complete adoration for getting accurate answers, accurate results.
Yeah.
And again, you don't always get it right. And as time goes on, you'll find out, oh, this was actually this. But that's history. That's what history is.
Yeah.
The historian today is writing about another historian's book about another historian's book about another historian's book. And that's how this stuff goes down. And you're really just adding your hypothetical page to an already existing tome of massive
Right.
proportions.
And at best, like there might be like a new primary source that gets uncovered.
Sure.
Like I think about when Darwin's wife's cookbook
Yeah.
got published.
Okay, nice.
Because there's a lot of debate about like where his illness came from throughout his life. Some people thought it was anxiety. Some people thought he caught some kind of tropical disease. When the cookbook came out,
everybody realized that's what it was.
Maybe he was lactose intolerant.
Yeah.
Because she used heavy cream all
Right.
the time. And he seemed to get better when but the point is like, even then, they're still just in conversation with these other historians that have made these theories that, you know, none of it is going to end up being the truth with a capital T, right?
Yeah,
it's all
exactly.
different interpretations of the same kind of facts.
Yeah.
It's really rare that you have like a new source get uncovered that turns things on its head.
I will say this. Now, obviously, in the first book, there's tons of that.
Yeah.
It's just every page is that. But in this one, because
But it hadn't been documented in the first place.
exactly that, I mentioned that recently too. That it's something that this is all new to the written page. This book, there is also some new discoveries and some things that have never been uncovered on the page or off. So there are some really cool surprises in this book. Some that adhere to personnel, some that have to do with promotion, some that have to do with things that even George has done tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of interviews in his life.
Mm-hmm.
And to try to get new organic information out of George, you really have to know what kind of questions to ask.
Yeah.
So I tried to focus on questions I'd never heard people ask him with reference to this time in general. So he was able to give me stuff I've never heard him talk about. And when you watch George and my podcast, A Bump by Bump Rundown.
Yeah.
That's
Which you definitely should watch, everybody. It's awesome.
That's just how we talk. Like, that's just how we have conversation in general. I try to keep it focused when we do the show. But that's just our general kind of... So we're having these conversations all the time, and there's constantly sort of new things coming to light. So for there to be after knowing this man almost 30 years and being his friend for 30 years, to have like new information come to light from recent interviews shows A, how much he's done, B, how good his memory is, and C, just how much there is to still know. And so, yeah, we definitely uncovered, not just through George's interviews, but through a lot of the other guys too. We uncovered some things that A, nobody's talked about before, and B, nobody's really heard about before. So it takes both getting the subjects to talk about those untalked about things and having the reader find out, oh, this has never been mentioned before.
Yeah,
There's a lot.
yeah.
There's a lot to that. But yeah, there are a lot of surprises and stones turned over in this new book too.
I hope there was at least one question I asked you that you hadn't gotten before.
No, actually, most of these are really good. These are good
thanks,
questions.
man.
Yeah.
I wasn't
Actually,
fishing
all
for
of these,
compliments.
are really good.
I was just trying to make a joke.
Yeah,
but
no, these are all good questions. Look, and I've been interviewed many times.
I know you've been doing a lot of these
Yeah,
lately,
yeah.
man. So, and I haven't listened to all of them. So
Sure.
I've been trying.
And I keep everyone different, but it's easy
Yeah.
to keep them different because everybody's questions are pretty different.
That's good. That's good.
So I try to keep a specificity to my approach. Yeah, we're definitely talking about a lot of the nooks and crannies in the historiography, which I think is important.
And I guess that leads me to one of the last things I really want to ask you today.
Yeah.
At least I'd love to have you back sometime.
I would love
man.
to be back.
But how did you stay objective? The other side of that, where on the one hand, like you being in the band, being the big fan is like part of what gave you the authority and legitimacy to do it.
Yeah.
But it also like, how do you avoid being the guy
know.
in the story? Part of it, you weren't there.
I wasn't born
for this,
yet.
for
Yeah,
this.
I wasn't born yet. That helps.
So that helps.
Yeah.
But you do know all these people.
I do, and I do develop a bias based on cult of personality, familial relationships, work relationships, decades of working with some of these guys. You do develop biases.
He's your boss.
Yeah, and all these guys are my big brothers.
Yeah,
it can be difficult. However, I go back to my colloquial. I go back to my history analysis, writing about history. I go back to those courses. There were 2 or 3 really important ones in my history degree. And they always talked about, they used to make us write about stuff that was close to us in order for us to eschew the feelings of bias and make the non-biased approach be the primary approach and have the bias come in where it's necessary to give a non-analytical human idealism
Right.
to the narrative. It doesn't happen all the time. And I try to keep it, luckily, even a book like this, like you said, I'm separated from it by many years. I wouldn't join the band for another 29 years. So luckily, I'm separated from this stuff, and it definitely gives me a less biased approach. Having been a fan of this stuff, you have to be careful of bias too. Because
I run into that on here.
yeah,
For sure.
yeah. Like fans who become musicologists who aren't in the band fall privy to just the same kinds of problems as ones who would be in the band, if not worse problems, because they're dealing with hearsay, all kinds of hearsay that has or has not been legitimized or delegitimized by the important people involved. They fall under the same types of issues. Your best historian has to be careful of those types of things. So I think it's equal across the board, but I try to stay as unbiased as possible and give a large kind of consensus based on majority rules, based on accuracy of intel, based on the number of legitimate sources, based on the number of sources I can cite that can back up said.
And I think it's really important that you acknowledge that you have like that's the only thing you can do at the end of the day is like acknowledge, like, hey, this is a perspective that's going to be a little bit biased. Like, I'm not pretending to not be part of this.
Right.
And that's, I think, important. Do you know of any other bands that have the kind of history importance in-house that do you know of any other people that have stepped into a role similar to yours with other musicians?
The Zappa family, his kids have done a lot to curate.
For
Although that kind of comes directly from the family, which I guess is a little different. No other pop group goes as long as this. So this is really setting the precedent for historiography within a group setting, a band setting.
Mhm.
In a lot of ways, we're treading new ground because this book represents the first monograph in P-Funk historiography.
Yeah.
So there are memoirs out there, there are autobiographies out there are biographies out there, and there is an oral history. However, at this point, it leaves out a large portion of the history since it was written.
Yeah.
And there are books that deal with P-Funk history in a more cursory way.
And the historical approaches have changed since those were written too, which I
Yeah.
think just the fact that you put all of 1975 in context in this book and in all of the ways that you talked about earlier is something that like those books wouldn't have done.
No, that wasn't their intention. That wasn't their goal. Nor was it even like
And
an
now it's
idea
almost like
yet.
standard.
Yeah.
It's almost like if you're writing about this time, you have to put it all in context
Yeah.
before you launch off.
And I also wanted academia. George and myself have been very dedicated to academia enveloping P-Funk history a little bit more because now we're at 70 years, and academia has only been flirting with this concept for maybe about 10 years.
Yeah.
With what do they need? What does academia need to further the proponents of P-Funk historiography in said academia? What do they need to further the legitimacy of P-Funk historicity and historiography in academia? What they need is more books. What they need is more monographs. They need more actual history books. So this is going to be the beginning of a series of what I call yearbooks, for lack of a better word. Books about different years in P-Funk history and what makes them important, and really just touches on puts the microscope in on a moment and says this happened and this happened and it changed the world.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And it's both these books are on a typically academic publisher.
Sure.
So,
yeah.
That I feel like that helps with creating legitimacy for universities. And these are things that I think are important, maybe not always important. Sometimes they're abused.
Yeah.
But I do think like you're doing it the way that it needs to be done in the systems that are built in order to get this shit into the curriculum.
And I'm trying to do it in a way, George never wants it to be like gestated in a way where it becomes like sterile. You know what I mean? Because it can happen very easily with any art form. And you look at how like some academia has co-opted jazz into something it necessarily wasn't. So you have to be very careful to maintain a historiographical approach that maintains authenticity and doesn't dust the dirt off of it, because the dirt is an important part of it. Yeah, so it's about not cleaning it. It's about presenting it as it is to the academics. This is what it is. Take it as it is, at its purest, cleanest, and still historiographical form.
The world's a messy place.
It's a messy place. It's got to be messy.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to say about this book before we? Because I feel like, dude, you and I could talk for hours and hours, but people are gonna get bored. We should probably.
Yeah, that's cool. I would say it's available everywhere books are sold.
Yeah.
You can get it direct from the publisher. That does help me, but you can also get it from Amazon, and a review on there helps me big time too.
Especially because then it says verified purchase. So
exactly.
That's a nice thing about there. Yeah.
And it's already at number 3 or 4 on the R&B soul charts for Amazon, which is great because it hasn't even come out yet. So I would recommend that people get it everywhere books are sold. Please recommend it for your local brick and mortar stores too, like Barnes & Noble or Books A Million, because they already have the book.
Yeah.
They just need to place it in their brick and mortar.
Yeah.
So if the Kansas City Barnes & Noble doesn't know that they should put it there, they won't. But if somebody comes in and says, hey, you guys should have this, is a great book, they'll put it in there because they've already got it on back order. In addition, I highly recommend, because with the first book, this was very successful. I always tell everybody, highly recommend that you recommend it for your local public library, university bookstore, or school library, depending on what age you are, because all 3 of those became big proponents of the first book of the Authorized P-Funk Song Reference, and now the Authorized P-Funk Song Reference is in libraries all over the world. I would like very much for the same thing to be true of Make My Funk the P-Funk. So I just recommend everybody recommend it for your local libraries. If you read it and you like it, write a review.
Hell yeah, man.
Yeah.
And the podcast that you do with George, I think, is really something special.
Yeah.
And
Thank
it's
you.
been a really nice companion piece to
To the book, yeah.
the book. Everybody should check that out as well.
It's bump by bump rundown.
I hate sending people to another podcast. No, I'm just kidding. Baron retired, so you've got room now.
Nice. Bump by bump rundown. Yeah, it's George's, and it's attached to his Patreon as well, which people, if they love P-Funk, they'd love his Patreon.
The cool thing about the Patreon is you're constantly putting out like unreleased songs.
Oh, yes.
And this is part of the archiving process too. Is like as you're archiving this stuff, you're releasing unreleased stuff all the time.
Stuff that's never seen the light of day, which the fans love. And then I highly recommend, if you're trying to figure out, because I'm always doing new stuff, man. Got like the comic books, the albums, the poetry books, concerts, curated sets, lectures, book signings. And so the best place to probably check out what I have coming up is I have a little podcast, Danny on Everything. And it's not just my stuff, but I do interviews with famous folks, with important folks in the P-Funk and other places, and concerts that have never before, you can't see anywhere else. And I also promote all my stuff. It's probably the easiest way to find out where I'll be next and what I'll be doing.
And you're doing book tours and all kinds of stuff coming up.
All through the end of this year and all through next year.
Man, I'm so excited to read this book.
Thank you,
I can't
man.
wait. I want to tell you the way I first ever heard George. It's silly, but I was probably not much older than 11.
Yeah.
And I watched PCU.
Yeah.
And and it's still, dude, that movie's still pretty funny. Like, in fact, in some ways, it aged remarkably well.
It did age remarkably well. Because I saw it not too long ago. I was like, oh, this is still pretty good.
Yeah, it still is, man. And I just, I was been a fan ever since I've seen him. Like, my aunt and I have seen him in the past, seen y'all in the past.
Yeah.
Where does that drive to play? And you hinted at it at the beginning. You're backstage and you and George are just singing all night and they can't get rid of you. And, is that where it comes from? These 3-hour, 4-hour shows, these playing all night.
Yeah.
You just get stuck in the quicksand, huh?
Yeah, it's like that. Like, and it all comes down to the boss and his love for it. He's still very excited about what he does. And his favorite thing to say is, we're just getting started. We're just getting started. He always says that. And if you work with him, you really feel that, because he's still the 15-year-old kid that started the Parliaments. He's still that 15-year-old kid excited about the next venture. He's always excited about the next venture. So, yeah, that's where it comes from. It comes from the big guy. There's no replacing a George Clinton, because his infectious energy is what drives this thing more than anything else. So it's really special.
Man, congratulations on making your fucking dreams come true.
Thank you.
And I hope that these books keep coming out, man. I hope you keep doing these. I'm really excited. These are the books I like to read. These are the kinds of books I read on a regular basis.
Nice.
So I think there's like a big audience for stuff like this. Make My Funk the P-Funk. Danny Bedrosian. Pick up the book. Pick up the authorized P-Funk song reference. I'll have pictures of that and links to everything, links to the podcast. Danny, it's been fucking awesome, man.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I
appreciate you. Hope you enjoyed my talk with Danny Bedrosian, good old Danny. That was awesome. It's one of those opportunities that I just can't believe came my way. Thanks, Danny, again for doing that. His new book is amazing, and just like I feel like Danny had to acknowledge that he was going to have some level of bias writing a book about the band that he's in. I am going to have a little bit of a bias towards a positive bias towards the review of the book that somebody I know wrote. I don't really interview people on this podcast that I'm not a fan of, so there's always going to be that inherent bias a little bit in the way I talk to them and the things that we talk about. I do think Danny avoided getting too self-reflective in the book. He's talking about a time and a place in the band in this particular book that he was not there for. The way that he puts the band in the context of everything going on in 1975, the way he interjects both archival material and interviews with the people that were there is a really amazing format and unique way that I haven't really come across. Just not quite the way he does it, at least in terms of music history books. The first book really was like an encyclopedia, and I really do encourage people to pick that one up. It's something I go to frequently when listening to Parliament or Funkadelic or anything part of that whole thing. But this new book really is a book you can sit down and read. I read it it was less than 2 days. It may have been less than 24 hours. It was less than 30 between when I picked it up and when I finished it. Couldn't put it down. It was great. It really makes you feel like you're there in a way that a really good novel can, capturing the vernacular of the people that he interviewed and having all the archival material to reference really painted a rich picture. And I think picking that year in the first place was really a great choice for Danny. There's a reason he picked that year and was transformative, not just for the band, but I think for a lot of culture. And check it out. I don't know a whole lot else to say about the book without getting into spoiling it for people, other than I think that it set an example for the way that books in the history of music can be written. But it's also, as Danny pointed out, like the window for the kinds of books like this being written is closing for some artists, because you do have to be able to sit down with some of the people that were there and have those conversations and interview them. Thanks for listening, y'all. Check out Make My Funk the P-Funk by Daniel Bedrosian. There's a link to grab it from the publisher in the description. Thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you next week.